the comparison approach. Now, you're going to have a lot of situations where you're comparing two different options or two different scenarios or situations. Now, the most important thing that you got to remember is what type of comparison are you doing? Now, is it a apple-to-apple comparison? And if it is, then it's easier because you're reviewing two different options within the same information. So I'll give you an example. Let's say they have a policy and they have two vehicles liability and they're paying $120, and we have an option of $80 for the same scenario. So that's an apple-to-apple comparison. That means the two situations are identical, just the prices are different. So it's easier because all you have to do is just emphasize on savings. The option that we have is cheaper than the other one. Now, when you have two different scenarios, let's say, for instance, two vehicles liability, $120 a month. Now they want to add a third car for full coverage. So now you're going to have to be a little bit more creative, simply because you're going to have to give them, re-quote them with their company, adding the third vehicle, so you could actually compare an apple-to-apple comparison. So you're still going to have to make the changes, or at least recalculate the changes of what it would be if they make the changes with their current policy, and compare that to the option that we're giving them. Simply because if you compare the $120 that they're paying, and now you're giving them $200 a month, adding the third vehicle for full coverage, they may not understand that it's two different situations. They're going to look at the $120 and the $200, and they're going to want to pay the $120. So if you make the changes, and instead of $120, now you're emphasizing on $300, adding the third vehicle for full coverage, now you could compare the $300 to the $200. Now you can add value on the fact that the option that we have is a lot lower. So once again, the comparison approach technically requires you to evaluate the situation and to make sure to follow the right approach, to emphasize on an apple-to-apple comparison. If not, it may not have as much value as it would if you keep both situations the same.